point I want to make here is if we go to the way I've written the book, it's chronologically organized. So if you go to 1838, which if you have the book then will take you to page 222. I'll tell you the story of the Battle of Blood River and what happened. I won't repeat the story. But it's always useful, in my view, this is now Ruben Richards speaking, to take a 10-year view before and a 10-year view after. Now, what was going on in South Africa 10 years before 1838? So 1828, then if you want to say 1848, okay? Bear in mind here, 1838 is the Blood River, okay? All right, Battle of Blood River. And this is during the British period. All right, what was the big issue during the British period? Slavery. And the British were on a mission to abolish, to get rid of slavery. So these are the big enlightened, liberal thinking people, and you had this anti-slavery movement. If you remember the name of Wilberforce, for example, William Wilberforce, who's part of this anti-slavery movement, and they are convincing the British government to abolish slavery. Now the Dutch, slavery was the name of the game. The Dutch brought slaves from Indonesia to Cape Town. That's how we got all the Muslim slaves, what we call the Muslim people today. They were brought in from Indonesia mainly. The African slaves of West Africa didn't come down to Cape Town. They went across the ocean to the United States, which is why we have a different experience of slavery in South Africa. Okay? But slavery was on its way out. Now, in 1828, the British government at the time now in Cape Town, in South Africa, they passed a law. It's called Ordinance 50. Call it Law Number 50 to make it easy. The Law Number 50 said, listen carefully now, everybody is equal. The Hottentot, because by that time the Khoi were called Hottentot people, or Hottentotten, was the Dutch word for the Khoi and San in Cape Town, Hottentotten. The Hottentotten is equal to the white people. Really? We didn't have to wait for 1994 to be equal. In 1828, we were equal. Well, of course, we were equal when we were born, but that's another discussion. So in law, the British passed this law, Ordinance 50. Ordinance 50 creates a big problem because it changes the nature of relationships between the boer, the farmer, and the worker. Now, there's a problem. And linked to that whole Ordinance 50 are all sorts of rules that the farmer cannot punish the worker in the way they used to punish them, and so forth. In 1832, 1834, the British Parliament in England now abolished slavery. There may not be slavery as an economic system functioning in the British Empire anymore. 1834. A delegation of white people from South Africa go to the British and they say, listen, man, listen, you don't understand the implications of what you're doing here. Because if all these people are no longer slaves, who's going to work on our farms? So we're asking you for 4 years, 4 and 4 takes you to 1838, just get the picture. 4 years to do what we call apprenticeship. Okay. So slavery is abolished, but in South Africa, we want 4 years of apprenticeship so that we can train up the slaves, the workers, so they can get some skills and then they can look after themselves in the marketplace. That was the thinking. It's like a BEE situation over here. Okay? 4 jaar basis, 4 years. That 4 years takes you to 1838. Keep 1838 is the Battle of Blood River. What else happens in 1834 when slavery is abolished? I have to depend on Ilse now. Well, Ilse didn't do history, so. Die groot trek, the great trek, as it is described in history. The Afrikaners trek. And this is put it here, the great trek. Okay? I must hasten to add that that wasn't the only trek in the history of South Africa, because the Khoi and San also had a great trek. If you just follow the history of the Griquas, for example. Okay. So the groot trek happens. Why? Because the Afrikaners, led by Piet Retief, say, where is so? Listen here. These British people, with their liberal thinking, want to come and tell us that these slaves and us are equal. No. That's not how God intended it to be. You're getting a feel for, and their belief in their understanding of God and the Bible was so strong that they decided they're going to pack up and leave, because here is the devil is busy here. Don't you know why you're laughing? No? You never thought of it that way. No? Think about it. That is what drove the great trek. Now, I won't bore you with the detail from my books, where I quote from Retief's diary and his manifesto. We can do that in another seminar. But the great trek, as it's referred to, is a group of Afrikaners saddling up their oxen and jigatos. And on that journey into the north, towards the north of the country, remember, they must go from Cape Town, then Graaf Reinet, then the Eastern Cape, and then through, and you're going up through the middle of the country, dan kom jy by die Oranje Vrystaat uit, the Orange Free State. You can see that's where they start the Republic. Then you go further up north, you get to the Transvaal, they started the Republic. That line starts in 1834. On that journey, they meet Dingaan, the Zulu king. And that's where the Battle of Blood River happens. So now you've got the picture. Okay? So it doesn't just happen out of the sky. Hierdie mense was op pad. They were on their way to their version of heaven and freedom and, shall we call it, democracy, and how to live. And in their world of how to live, white people were superior to black people. That's the reality. That was their belief system. That's what drove them. And on that route, they meet the Zulus, you can imagine, they win the war against the Zulus. 20,000 Zulus, less than 500 of us. They win the war. God must be on our side. This is confirmation God is on our side. Not just on our side, but God agrees with what we believe, which is white people are superior to black people. Now, let's show a bit of empathy and sympathy for the belief system. Because everything around them confirms a view that says, God has rescued us. If we were to lose our battle, okay, another story. Different picture. But at this stage of the game, everything around them confirmed their theology and their belief system. All right. Bearing in mind, we are in the British period. The British are the enemy. Because the British says what? Ordinance 50, the Hottentots, the colored people are equal, the slaves are equal to everybody. There's a slight problem with the British thinking. In 1844, the early 1840s, so the British abolish, let's call it the apartheid that was up here, but then they must bring in a new law to regulate the relationship between people. Because you need a law to regulate relationships between people. The one law says white people are superior, black people or people of color are inferior. Now when you change it and you say white people and people of color are equal, okay. Our mind tells us that sounds about right. But how do we relate to each other? The British, this wonderful, enlightened British people have an answer for you, Francina. They pass a law to regulate the relationship between people. And they call the law, I'll write it up for you, the Masters and Servants Law, or the Masters and Servants Act. Piece of law that says in this society of equal people, there are masters and there are servants. Guess who were the masters? And guess who were the servants? I don't think people of color were the masters. I don't think so. Okay, sê dit nou tong en kies. Okay? Tongue in cheek here. So this piece of legislation, today in South Africa, we don't call it the Masters and Servants Act. Guess what it's called? It's called the Labour Relations Act. So this is how you regulate the relationship between an employer, a master, and an employee, a servant. Now what happens when the employer is black and the servant, the employee, is white? I mean, you need a bit of a mind shift change here. In South Africa today, it is still the case that the majority of masters or employers is what color? And who are the servants? So, labor relations. Now, one more date. I said to you 10 years before, Ordinance 50. 10 years after, I'm going to put up a name for you. We won't talk about it in too much detail today, but I'm just going to put up here the Cat River settlement. Have you ever heard of the Cat River settlement? The Cat River settlement? Never heard of it? The Cat River settlement, I suppose today we'll call it a little mini homeland or something, or maybe controversial mini, what do you call it? Oranje? What do you call it? Oranje. Kind of an exclusive little area, big area in the Eastern Cape that was occupied by the Hottentots, also known as Coloureds today. There's an area, a group of people who called as their pastor a former missionary, James Reed. Who was James Reed? James Reed was a young white missionary who came to South Africa in the early 1800s. He was the assistant to Van der Kemp. And fortunately or unfortunately for James Reed, he fell in love with a Khoisan woman, Cape Town woman. And the London Missionary Society wrote him a letter about his marriage to a Francina, you know. And he writes back to his missionary, to his church, his missionary society. And this is what he says. And I quoted it on the back cover of my book. He says, "I have no reason whatsoever to repent of my marriage to a native Khoi woman." Let me just do it slowly. I have no reason to repent of my marriage to a woman of color, if I want to use today's language. In other words, his church was asking him to divorce his wife, to repent, to say he's committed a sin in the sight of God, because that's what you repent, for marrying an indigenous woman in South Africa. But here's the point. This young, he wasn't young anymore, but this pastor is now called to be the pastor of this group of people who live in the Cat River area. Cat River in Ooskaap. You will not find much written about that settlement, but let me summarize it for you as follows. The Cat River settlement produced the most educated colored people ever to be produced in the country. They were the most successful farmers ever in the country. And the British government decided they are too successful. We need to take them out, destroy them. And so they destroyed them. The strategy initially was through taxation. Reminds me of a good old King Solomon, taxing the poor. In this instance, taxing the settlement. And the settlement eventually falls apart for all sorts of reasons. That happens 10 years after 1838. Remember, I'm just trying to get a picture 10 years before, 10 years after. Wat het aangegaan, man?